When you get beyond labels, when you start understanding how people's religious tradition informs why they do what they do, I just think there's a wisdom there that is lacking.
Hey, it's Julie. Welcome to Uncomfy. A lot of us are struggling right now with how to stay open to others when we seem to be living in different realities. I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells with people and really struggling to feel like I can be my whole self in all the places that I am. But I also don't want to hide in my little corner. I don't want to give up on connecting with people. Well, this is a podcast about staying with the moments we usually want to escape, the awkward ones, the tense ones, the ones that can actually teach us something. So let's get uncomfy.
I think like most people in the worst moments, you just kind of think, oh God, am I back here again?
Friends, I want you to meet Niala Boodhoo. She is an award-winning journalist and she's a podcast host. You've probably heard her on NPR's 1A or one of the Axios podcasts that she created and hosted for a long time. Well, she's about to debut a new podcast that I'm really excited to hear more about. Niala, welcome to Uncomfy.
Thanks, Julie. It's so great to be here.
All right. You're right. A lot of us are like, oh, brother, here we are again. I got to do this again. What was that moment for you? What was going on?
That was a moment where I was told that Axios was no longer going to be doing audio and that my time with the company was coming to an end. And in that first moment, I was not super surprised, but just kind of exasperated. But the great thing is I also think it helped me work through the discomfort that I think probably most American journalists have right now about how we're doing what we're doing and think about a way to do things differently and better.
And you were also just about to take a sabbatical, weren't you, at this point?
So, right. And so just sort of in preparation for the idea that I was going to be taking a sabbatical, this was two summers ago, I had decided I was going to walk the Camino, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but it's an ancient pilgrimage route that people have been walking for centuries across France, Spain, Portugal. And you end up in Santiago de Compostela in Spain, which is where, for Catholics, St. James, they believe like his head is supposed to be buried there. And so that is this big cathedral. And there's these routes and they become very, very popular for Americans to walk.
And was this a spiritual thing for you or just kind of a trek, like a physical
No,
challenge?
it was for me. People can walk it for a variety of reasons. For myself as a Christian, I had just finished a couple months prior a cycle of the Ignatian exercises, which is a form of Jesuit spirituality. I'm actually Protestant, I'm Presbyterian, and the exercises are a way that a lot of Christians, predominantly Catholic, but some Protestants as well, have found, and it's sort of like been adapted to doing it through like a liturgical year. So it's normally like a 9-month study, and it is a very intensive study of scripture and discernment. And I had been going through that with the idea that I was thinking that some big work changes were coming and I just wanted the space. And so I thought that the Camino would be a great place at the end of all of that to process that.
So I guess the Camino then becomes an opportunity to kind of reflect on what does come next. What were some of the things that started to occur to you about what you wanted to do at this point in your career?
I think that most journalists are pretty frustrated with the way that we are covering news. And I will say that as someone who thinks there's a role and loves, like, I think like the Friday News Roundup, which I host on 1A, I think is an essential service for people, right? Because it's a way to have analysis about the news. I mean, I think that people are really searching, and I was really searching, as I have been sort of, like I mentioned to you, like the Ignatian spirituality, like all throughout my career. And honestly, I think part of the only way that I think you can host a daily news show or a weekly news show is to have like really strong, for me, it was to have a very strong sense of spirituality and faith that kind of helped me make sense of everything.
What do you mean by that? What, like, how did your faith help you make sense of what you were covering on a daily basis as a news host?
I think that, look, I think the news cycle is tough. I think news events are really hard. I think we cover a lot of terrible things as journalists. So for me, like, and this is not something that I ever talked about. This is like one of the first times I'm even talking about it with you, like just my own personal faith and spiritual formation was just a really important way for me to manage just sort of the difficulty and frankly the trauma of news, right? Of covering like yet another school shooting or a horrible natural disaster. I covered a lot of pretty traumatic news events. I would say like the worst was I covered the earthquake in Haiti, the catastrophic, and I had lived in Haiti before. Like I had really deep ties to the island. I grew up with my dad running a small missions organization in Haiti. So my first trip to Haiti was when I was 6 years old. Like between college and graduate school, I lived in Haiti, and I taught at an American missionary school for a year. And so to go back there as a journalist during the earthquake, when there was just like so much devastation, so much death, including people that I knew personally. Journalists cover stuff like that all the time, and I think it's very traumatic. And so for me, my spirituality and my faith has been just a really important part of how I make sense of the world, but also how I just cope with things on a daily basis. Just, I would say, and from a spirituality, just to be like very practical, just like having time away from devices, having time away from just sort of like the news cycle, even if it's just part of my day, just like having moments of meditation and quiet or one-on-one conversation with people that's like real actual conversation, like it really helps you put things in perspective.
So you're merging, so you've decided to make this new, I guess maybe that was one of the brainstorms, was like, what if I do a news show, but I also layer on it all this other stuff that's been important to me, your own faith tradition, the way that it helps you make sense of the world and sort of make peace with the fact that terrible things happen.
I was thinking about the next news show that I'm going to create is going to be different. Like I really want it to be a different way into the conversation for people who are exhausted by the news, or people who are the news junkies who know every facet of the news, but then feel like, what do I do now? Like, how do I think about this? How do I talk about this? And I also just sort of was thinking a lot about American society and just feeling like we don't have conversations, like we need to have more conversations about morality. And when I was creating this show with my production partner, who, by the way, does not really come from a faith tradition, the conversation we had was around how can we glean wisdom from different religious traditions, and how important is it for us to be in conversation with people from another religion and learn about those religious traditions. And so it's not about like these conversations for this show aren't about like learning about a religion in particular, but they're about learning from a religion, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Give me an example. Like what's something that you've covered? You should tell us what it's called. And I'm just so fascinated because I also can really relate to this sense of feeling as a person of faith, a Christian who also has been a journalist for a similar period of time, and kind of feeling like those things had to stay in the public eye, kind of had to stay separate, right? Like you're a journalist out in the world, and kind of in my private life, I'm also a person of faith. And I, in recent years, have also had the opportunity to kind of be a little bit more vocal about like, this is how my faith tradition is sort of shaping the way I think about the world. And how about you? What is it doing for you? Because so many of us are, in fact, people of faith in America, right? Of various different faith traditions. So tell us, I'm just so fascinated. I can't wait to listen.
Yeah.
Tell us what you're calling it and give me an example of the kind of conversation.
The show's called Oh God, Now What? And it's because, right, it's because I think that's how people feel, right? But actually, we really like, there's no punctuation in it because you can kind of read that however you want. So you could say, oh God, now what? For people who are Christian, like it could be, or other faith traditions, it could be a lament. Like it could be a lot of things, right? We wanted to make people laugh, but we also wanted to be relatable. So for an example, the first episode of our show is about moral voting in the midterms. So one of my first guests for the first show is Rabbi Jill Jacobs, and she runs Trua, which is an organization that actually trains other rabbis in how to like civic engagement and political engagement. And She's in New York. She's a prominent Jewish leader in New York. And Zohran Mamdani has not, like, you know, there's been a lot of tension between the Jewish community and Mayor Mamdani, like people who have accused him of being anti-Semitic, using anti-Semitic language. And she said, and I just loved this, she was like, look, I think there should be a two-state solution. He does not think that. But at the end of the day, no one's coming to us to negotiate whether there should be a one or two-state solution. And I just, like, when she said that, I just laughed because I think in this political climate, we take things so seriously. And, like, she's like, he and I are not negotiating that. But what we are doing is, like, living in New York and trying to take care of New York and trying to take care of the people in New York. And we can agree on different things with that. And that's why I think it's important to have a relationship with him. He's the mayor of New York City. I am a rabbi in New York. Like, I want the Jewish community in New York to be working with the mayor of New York City. And I think that's like an example of just something that you cannot summarize in 10 seconds or, you know, like when you get beyond labels, when you start understanding like how people's religious tradition informs why they do what they do. I just think there's a wisdom there that is lacking, that I think we could all be served by spending a little more time like trying to understand.
Yeah. So each of the episodes then is going to maybe take a current sort of challenge, grapple, news event, and kind of try to explore it from the lens of someone's faith tradition. That's probably way oversimplifying it, but it sounds fascinating to me.
You're not oversimplifying. That's exactly it. Like big things, right? Like artificial intelligence, but also like I think things that maybe are more mundane, like travel, like how we can think about travel being an opportunity to learn and how travel can be sacred, even if it's not like a pilgrimage, like what I did. Or art, right? Like, I think it's fascinating to think about the role that art and creativity can play in helping us get out of the current moment or understand the current moment. And artists who feel like it's an important part of their faith tradition to be doing that. So that's kind of the idea of each show. And I will say, like, you know, as we're talking about values, I have always been an optimistic person, which is probably also the only reason why I've survived in the news this long. But I think that it's really about being deeply rooted in reality and not being unrealistic about the difficult things, but then also asking, like, what keeps you going? Like, I think that most people who adhere to religious belief, or like even as I've encountered, like, and who we'll have on the show, like, people who are avowed atheists but are secular humanists, they have a structure where they're like, this is what gives me hope. This is why I do it. Even if it's not from a divine being, it's from a sense of like shared humanity. I think that people who have really rigorous frameworks that they adhere to that are religious or spiritual or moral have reasons for hope because they wouldn't have that otherwise.
Niala Boodhoo is an award-winning journalist, a podcast host with more than 20 years of experience. She's been at NPR, Axios, Reuters, the Miami Herald. And this new show she's been talking about is called Oh God, Now What? It debuts on August 15th. You can find it on Substack or anywhere you get your podcasts. I really am excited to give it a listen. Niala, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Julie.
And thank you for getting Uncomfy with us today. So what are your thoughts? What is your experience with dealing with the discomfort of consuming the news? And how does your own faith color the way you think about these big questions that we grapple with in society? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email uncomfy@byu.edu or find us on social media to continue the conversation. We're at uncomfy.podcast on Instagram. Uncomfy is a BYU Radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it, and the team includes Maggie Mathis and Abby Karras. Our theme music was composed by Kelsey Ney. I'm Julie Rose. Can't wait to get uncomfy with you again next week. Hey, friends, quick recommendation for your podcast queue. Do you remember that movie that you had on VHS or DVD that you watched so many times it wore out? Well, movies didn't just entertain us, they shaped who we are. And there's a new BYU Radio original podcast called Voiceover, Movies That Move Us. I think you're really going to like. Film studies PhD Heather Bigley hosts the show. She has guests on, and they talk about movie moments that shifted perspective, that sparked self-reflection or stirred their souls.
Plus, they give recommendations for movies you might want to check out. You can listen to VoiceOver, Movies That Move Us, now on BYU Radio or anywhere you find your podcasts.